Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1125 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Well guys, it turns out that Egghead was not actually over. I'm not gonna say it this week. We're not gonna say it this week, not falling into the trap 2 weeks in a row. But good lord was this chapter good, and it gave so much closure. Honestly, this chapter delivered on a lot of things that we predicted during the arc, that I expected during the arc, and kind of forgot about, honestly. Well, some things I forgot about, other things I definitely did not. Needless to say, there was a ton of correct theories. You take the dubs when you can get them. I have a feeling that the beginning of this chapter is going to be a little bit underrated compared to the middle, and the end, just by comparison, but it was just as good. Firstly, we get closure about the seraphim. The seraphim was a huge discussion point throughout the entirety of the arc, and in contrast to how I began this review, I was pretty much wrong at every turn about the seraphim. But it's just one of those situations where Oda can pretty much do whatever he wanted to do with them, and it would definitely work, and you're still excited about them in the future. But we speculated throughout the arc like maybe Blackbeard would acquire the seraphim. Maybe S-Bear will team up with Jewelry Bonnie because we see S-Snake has like some remnants of feelings for Luffy. Maybe some memories attached to her lineage factor in some way, like there's a bit of the actual person inside the seraphim, so maybe S-Bear has a little bit of love, fatherly love that is, for Bonnie, and we'll see that play out. Instead, the arc ends and the seraphim are still in the control of the world government and they're just taking them back to their base. On the surface, this might seem anticlimactic. Where we began the arc and where we ended the arc is the same, but I actually don't think that that's the case at all. Honestly, if I'm taking anything away from the seraphim, it's that they are very, very similar to the Pacifista, but the main difference is that they appear to have actual, real personalities. They are far more alive than the Pacifista are. Part of me right now believes that Oda was intentional in designing the seraphim as children. Why did he design them as children? Because spiritually, that is what they are. They are, basically, still growing. They haven't reached adulthood. But you guys already know freedom is a big concept in the story of One Piece. It applies to literally everybody. And because the seraphim are alive, they have personalities, they can have experiences which might potentially change their mindset. They're not entirely programmed. I think everything that happens matters. I will eventually make a whole entire Egghead arc video. I just want to take my time and make sure that I do it right. But one of the things that we're definitely going to talk about is we're going to talk about the concept of slavery, because that was something that I felt like was a shared theme between many of the main characters of the arc. You can think about slavery as being the opposite of freedom. People who cannot do what they want to do. And so I think that Kizaru kind of spearheaded this subliminal messaging in the arc. Despite being a Marine Admiral, he is not free because he's not doing what he wants to do. Kizaru is a slave. Ironically, not all that dissimilar to the role that Kuma played. Kuma gave up his personality, he gave up his agency in order to save his daughter. And I think that we'll eventually find out that Kizaru gave up his agency, basically gave up his personality to save the world or something like that. But it applies to the seraphim as well. But just the same as Kuma and Kizaru are similar but different, the seraphim are similar but different. They haven't given up anything, at least based on ideology or wants, but it can be taken with a command. So I guess I'm saying in a long way that I think that a lot of things that we discussed about the seraphim are still going to be relevant in the story going forward. They're children, and they're gonna go through this arc of sort of discovering what it is that they actually want, because right now they don't have anything that they specifically want. But the moment that they discover this, they will be at odds with their own slavery. Probably. I think that at least a few of them, potentially all of them, ultimately end up as characters that we want to root for their freedom. And of course, the freedom-spreading guy in the story of One Piece is Luffy, and this is just potentially a role that Lilith could play in the story at some point in the future, as she travels with the Straw Hats. One of many things that Lilith could do. But then we go from here to Kaku and Lucci. The Marines ask them what happened to Stussy, and as Kaku quietly resides in the back of the panel, Lucci tells us that Stussy was killed in action. Guys, the reason that I love this so much is that Oda left it ambiguous. And because it's ambiguous, it remains interesting. Even the phrasing here of killed in action suggests sort of like complex layers. At the very least, Lucci does not want to tell everyone that they were betrayed by a member of CP0. Lucci is covering up what actually happened. One thing though that I think is for sure true is that Stussy was not killed. From the last scene that we got between Stussy and Kaku, it is abundantly clear that Kaku did not have it in him to kill Stussy. So if Stussy is actually dead, then Lucci would have had to been the one to kill her. And had Lucci done that, I think that we wouldn't see her body. And frankly, it's to the point that I don't actually think that Kaku would have let Lucci kill her. But the question that we're left with that I find to be intriguing is whether or not Lucci knows that Kaku spared Stussy. Basically, is what Lucci said in this chapter just what he heard from Kaku. Kaku lied to Lucci. Kaku told Lucci that Stussy was killed in action. And so that is what Lucci believes. Or on the other hand, did Lucci catch Kaku and Stussy and then let it happen? This is one of the single greatest things about Lucci as a character because we have the whole backstory of the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arc, where we know that they were planted as legitimate members of Galley Law, a role that they played for years. Basically, Lucci is an incredible liar, for a fact. While we had a lot of discussion about what Lucci would do in this arc, again, a lot of things proven ultimately wrong, like is he actually going to stick with the government or not? You know, I think majority of people would take away from this arc that Lucci is evil, is aligned with the government, and that will always be the case. But I found myself gathering this sort of alternative messaging, which is that Lucci is also kind of now the captain of his own crew. If you guys recall, Lucci wasn't actually supposed to engage Luffy. He chose to do that on his own. He did not follow his orders. I still think that Lucci has agency. He is more free than Kizaru. Freedom means that he might make individualistic choices. Different to how I saw him in Water 7 and Enies Lobby, I now think that Lucci cares about Kaku and all of his other subordinates. They have a bond. So there is a universe where I could see Lucci essentially catching Kaku and Stussy, but letting Stussy go because that is what Kaku wants. And either way, I prefer to interpret it in this way, kind of hazy gray area of Lucci is, you know, obviously loyal to the world government, but only to an extent because it just makes that character seem more relevant going forward. If Lucci is simply a dog of the government, I care less about him. But I have these thoughts because I now view Kaku and Lucci as a team. So while Kaku seems doubtful about what he is doing, why he's doing it, that then gets applied to some degree to Lucci by association. Now that I hope we all are rooting for an EOS happy ending for Kaku and Stussy, as you know, like they're clearly in-game a couple if they're both alive, right? It makes you think about what the end of the story has in store for Lucci himself. Is it possible for him to get a happy ending? And if so, what would that look like? I still don't feel like we truly understand him. But then the chapter flipped to Saturn. And oh boy, was it great. Honestly, my hairs are standing up on my arm just thinking about it. It was intense. We see Saturn in a room in a ship addressing the 9 vice admirals. Interestingly, Kizaru is not there. Saturn tells us that we obtained everything that we set out for. York, Punk Records, and the power station. All of this to have access to the Mother Flame. But despite obtaining everything that they actually set out for, something happened which they hadn't anticipated, which kind of ruined the whole deal. Vegapunk's message. We said this throughout the arc, but Saturn is not as smart as he wants to believe himself to be. There's some parallel going on between Vegapunk and Saturn. Both Saturn and Vegapunk are men of science. Saturn essentially borrowed Vegapunk's genius to utilize this information and this technology for his own ends. Similar to how Vegapunk borrowed the technology of the past from the ancient kingdom. I guess a better way to phrase this is both of them stood on the shoulders of giants. In Vegapunk's case, this was quite literal. But anyway, both Saturn and Vegapunk shared this theme of existing in this unusual state of living, and both seemingly could not die and are immortal. This obviously relates to the title of this chapter, what constitutes death. You can also draw comparisons between the gorosei as a whole, with Imu being the Stilla, and then of course Vegapunk and his altars, which appears to be a confirmed theory by the way. It's also interesting that the Vegapunk altars had freedom, they had their own agency, and Vegapunk was ultimately betrayed by York, while in this chapter, it's essentially revealed that yes, the gorosei are related to Imu in some way. Imu allows them their abilities. They are connected, even talking to each other through their minds in the same way that Vegapunk and his altars did. But they are also their own people, capable of betraying Imu. At least this is the impression that I got. Let me know if you disagree, but I think that Saturn acted against Imu's wishes in preserving the ancient giant robot, giving it to scientists to hide from the government. But anyway, all of this was a really long tangent to get to the point that another shared theme between Vegapunk and Saturn is failure. Both geniuses, humble geniuses, smartest men in the world, right? That's the impression that we're supposed to have, yet both basically fail over and over again. Everything that Vegapunk creates has some flaw. even if sometimes the flaws are totally inconsequential, because he is a perfectionist. But likewise, just with this example of Saturn and the ancient giant robot, perhaps some aspects of Saturn's plan here was a success. Maybe Vegapunk does not develop the mother flame which they now clearly care about and has powered their weapon. Maybe he doesn't do that unless 200 years in the past, Saturn gives the robot to scientists to preserve and study. But of course, the other half of this is the unintended consequences. Like, for instance, the robot waking up and saving Luffy, who is Joy Boy, basically the person that is going to take down your entire government. We said this throughout the arc, but everything that Saturn did ended up in some way failing. Literally everything. I thought it was ironic that he later said, how is it possible to predict the unpredictable? And it's like, bro, that is what the future is. You can't design it. You are not God, even if you believe that to be true. 200 years ago, Saturn preserves the robot. That backfires. More recently, Saturn failed to kill Kuma as a child. I don't know if this was Saturn specifically, but the world government then targeted the place where Kuma was trying to peacefully live, ultimately inspiring him to become king of this land. They also essentially forced him to join the Revolutionary Army, allowing him to directly interfere with their agendas. Saturn then thinks that it is a good idea to capture and experiment on Ginny. It is also most likely that Saturn is Bonnie's biological father. All this did was bring Kuma and Vegapunk together. But of course, Saturn thought that he had won because finally they could capture Kuma. He used Kuma's love for Ginny and for Bonnie to force Kuma to subjugate himself. But the end result of this is Bonnie, one of your primary enemies going forward. Vegapunk also gave her control of the Pacifista. And beyond that, the Revolutionary Army used the excuse of retrieving Kuma in order to attack the world government directly and declare war. All of this also served the purpose of further radicalizing Vegapunk so that we have this message drop right now. Vegapunk made it, in part, because he became conflicted about the nature of the government itself, from his own personal history, much of which is substantiated through Kuma. Long story short is, you could basically define the Egghead Island arc as the arc created because of Saturn's mistakes, not least of which is his mistakes in the arc itself, furthered as Punk Records floats up into the sky and escapes. Another confirmed theory, by the way. We made an argument in one chapter review or another that it's like literally clouds, and so if you cut it at any point in time, whoever does that, then it should just float away, right? That did in fact happen. But yeah, all of this to really say that I wasn't surprised that Imu decided to kill Saturn, which was an incredible moment. We said this a few times throughout the arc, but all of Saturn's failures, at some point in time, it would make sense for there to be consequences. But I don't think that anybody predicted that he would be replaced by Figurelin Garling. Man, there's so much to say here, and I feel like it's a task to keep everything in a linear train of thought. But a lot of our speculations about the nature of Saturn, the nature of the gorosei, their connection with Imu, a lot of this proved to be true enough. Saturn's immortality is clearly tied to Imu. We made a video or two where we pointed out that the way that Saturn and the gorosei appeared in Egghead was incredibly unusual. You have these weird pentagrams with numbers on them. It comes off as a black magic ritual. It is unlike any technology that we know. And with all of them being summoned in essentially the same way, in the same design, it connects their powers as if they are related. And all of them had this strange, unique, it's pointed out as unique ability to heal, beyond the clues that every single one of them was immortal and had been in power for hundreds of years at the very least. The thing or the person which would obviously connect all of the gorosei if their powers are interrelated is Imu. Now that's definitely true. Imu gives all of the gorosei immortality, and Imu can take it away when they desire. I still think that their devil fruit abilities, or the abilities that they showcase which appear to be devil fruits, might also be related to Imu. Straight up, my thoughts about Imu, their abilities overall have not changed, but now we know a little bit more to be a bit more confidently specific. I think that Imu is literally the devil. Whether they're a godlike entity or a devil fruit ability, it doesn't matter to me. But I do prefer the devil fruit angle, and that Imu is the devil of the sea. Given we have fruits in the story literally called devil fruits, it makes sense to me for Imu to potentially have the ability to grant devil fruit type powers, such as we've seen with the gorosei, grant them to people. It also makes sense for the devil to have some power relating to souls, which is clearly a thing in One Piece. You have Brook, you have Big Mom, so on and so forth. Powers which stretch the definition of what life and death are. So the devil is often associated with and described in a similar way as the Grim Reaper, the leader of hell. I think that you could think about the gorosei as souls that the Grim Reaper has not taken, and therefore they continue to live, far past when they should be dead. A little aside, which I found to be really interesting, is the blonde gorosei has always stood out as a member of the gorosei because he is significantly younger than the other ones, and for the longest time, we were speculating about this guy, like, you know, why is he younger? Like, was he newly recruited? Well, now we know that from the pentagrams that Jupiter is the #1 gorosei. Saturn was number 5. It seems pretty intuitive now to believe that Jupiter was the first gorosei, the first person that Imu made immortal, while Saturn was the last. I have it in mind that Jupiter is younger than all the others and was chosen first, because he's actually older than all of the others and maybe had a more direct personal relationship with Imu while he was alive, or before he should have died. Whereas now, and I know that this is speculation, but I have just the opinion, the impression that Saturn might have actually been selected as a gorosei perhaps hundreds of years after Jupiter. The way that the other gorosei reacted to what they knew was about to happen to Saturn almost implied that they'd seen this before. Imu has replaced members. And even beyond that, I think that Imu would want to select members of the gorosei that are individually incredibly powerful and have certain personalities, which Imu thinks are fitting. So you're not going to find all 5 of these people at once. They were steadily recruited over generations of celestial dragons. But it seems to me Imu is limited to 5 altars. He can grant abilities to 5 people. Although I like the theory that there are 6 and the Imu that we see might also be another altar. The real Imu remains hidden. But these were actual people. And that's one way in which we were wrong about a lot of the speculations involving Imu's abilities. It's now fair to assume that Figurelin Garling of the Gods Knights, if, you know, let's say Luffy loses hundreds of years past, right, he's gonna look exactly the same as he does now until Imu decides otherwise. But it is interesting that he is his own person with his own personal experience and wasn't just born a puppet of Imu. And as a theme to this review, has his own agency or freedom, personal desires and ambitions. Guys, I kind of think that Figurelin Garling might betray Imu. It's just a feeling I have. I'll make a whole video, a whole theory at some point in the future justifying this more. But needless to say, Oda's decision to add Garling to the gorosei is just a brilliant move. It is so interesting. One of the problems that you have with the gorosei is that these are all presumably ancient beings that don't have a direct relationship with the characters of the present. Now, of course, some of these connections do exist, like for instance, we just had the Egghead arc where, you know, Saturn and Kuma had a lot of history, but that was described as a unique story because Kuma was a buccaneer. In the vast majority of cases over the last hundreds of years, the gorosei simply don't involve themselves. They don't need to involve themselves. So adding a character like Garling does a lot of things simultaneously. There's already theories, highly substantiated theories, that Shanks is of the Figureland family. I think it's likely Garling is Shanks' father, so you have this connection. We also know that Dragon and the Revolutionaries are very aware of the God's Knight, seems to particularly fear them. Most likely there's some actual history between Dragon and Figurelin Garling. But then totally different to this, it becomes interesting now the interactions between Garling and the other members of the gorosei. Like, it just creates this impression in my mind that there's now some competition between them. We'll see if that stands up. And of course, this reinserts mystery about the gorosei themselves, just in the fact that what are Garling's powers? Suddenly the gorosei are less revealed. Fruitful layers are being added to the story. But yeah, just in the design of Figurelin Garling with his moon-shaped hair, but in this chapter we see a forward-facing version of it where it is the shape of the star, and everything about that is like, wow, Oda was intending this all along, no doubt. Honestly, very cool. Just thinking out loud, it makes me wonder whether Garling knew that taking the place of the gorosei was a possibility. I mean, he certainly took this promotion in stride. Is this what the God's Knights are supposed to be? Honestly, I want to compare it to the Flying Six of Kaido. During Wano, it was set up that a member of the Flying Six might become a member of Kaido's All-Stars. Stars. His Yonko commanders, called Stars. But yeah, just to say this before I forget, all of this reinforces some of my headcanon that Imu is essentially a pirate. It might have been a pirate at some point in his prior life. Rocks, a pirate, wants to become king of the world. Blackbeard likely wants the same. King of the world is Emu. It like suggests this pathway from pirate to king of the world. Don't forget Doflamingo as well, also a pirate. But beyond that, in this chapter, we got some discussion about the bridge in Tequila Wolf. Suddenly, people are putting the pieces together, revolutionaries are putting the pieces together of like what these bridges were actually for, and it's related to the flooding of the world. But in the same panel, we get names for other bridges that we haven't met in the story. Vodka Wolf, Rum Wolf, and Bourbon Wolf. So you have tequila, vodka, rum, and bourbon, all alcohol. Why is Emu and the world government naming bridges after alcohol? I'm just saying, it seems like a pirate thing to do. Always thinking about booze. I just have Jack Sparrow in my mind. Where's the rum? But why is the rum gone? But to go back to Saturn for a moment, we skipped over his interactions with the Vice Admirals. Like I said, how I would define this chapter is a chapter of closure. There's a little bit of closure for a lot of different groups. And I think that includes the Vice Admirals that participated in the battle. You know, I brought this up on multiple times throughout the arc, but I just wondered, what do the Vice Admirals think about what's going on here? They're Marines, right? They're basically military people, and in the military, one of the explicit or implicit rules is you follow orders. You follow orders or people die. It doesn't really work if everyone is going solo. So they remained dutiful throughout the arc, but I really wanted to know what they actually thought. The gorosei, beings from hell itself, have appeared and are fighting on your side. They have directly killed multiple innocent Marines. I don't know how they would not know that. You are trying to kill Dr. Vegapunk. A pirate is protecting him. This pirate is a legitimate god of joy. And then you have Vegapunk's message itself, which I presume they heard part of, if not the entirety of, which suggests that the world is in grave danger. Grave danger, is there any other kind of danger? And that the government is complicit in hiding this danger from everybody. Long story short is this entire arc is a bunch of faith-shattering events stacked on top of each other. But it seems like the mentality at least some of the Vice Admirals had is they doubted the truthfulness of Vegapunk's message, which of course makes sense because they are brainwashed. Honestly, the whole setup of this conversation I feel like was brilliant, because Saturn lays out the ways in which they succeeded, but then says, well, we also failed. And the immediate response of all of the Vice Admirals is, we're so sorry that we failed, we'll go get Straw Hat and Jewelry Bonnie. We'll follow him to Elbaf if need be. But they didn't really understand what the failure was. It was Vegapunk's message, because it was true. Honestly, Saturn implying that Vegapunk's message was true in a conversation with his subordinates was just another really stupid move by him. It's just stupid. When you are a liar, you need to channel your inner lawyer. Everyone should know you just deny. But he didn't, and Doberman immediately started to ask some questions, and Saturn killed him, possibly. Figureland Garling told us the world is heading for turmoil, an unprecedented level of rebellion is imminent. So this is just a precursor of what is to come. The good Marines are either going to die or they are going to leave the world government. That is definitely going to happen. But yeah, I'm curious what everyone thinks about the Vegapunk altars surviving. You know, we had this conversation at the end of the last chapter of like, what exactly is the state of the altars? Through the Straw Hat's conversation with Lilith, and Lilith was basically like, well, they're not actually dead. I wasn't anticipating such a direct confirmation of this in the most literal way possible in the next chapter. But here we are. They are literally not dead. So yeah, it should be pretty abundantly clear that there's a lot of inversions going on here between the Vegapunks and Emu and the gorosei once again. While all the altars seemingly are combined in the chapter and we get to hear their thoughts or their voices, you don't see the Stella. So I presume that the Stella Vegapunk is dead, contrast to the Stella Emu, who is not dead. But an interesting similarity is that both seem to have rejected a part of themselves. The altars have rejected York, whereas Emu rejected Saturn. And while the majority of the Vegapunk's altars have appeared in this chapter alive, of course, Saturn actually died, relating to the title of the chapter about what exactly death is, involving the two groups of people here who are immortal, the gorosei and the Vegapunks. I'm certain that there was a more eloquent way of phrasing this, but I think that you get this. I think that this seemed really abundantly clear to me what Oda was trying to compare and contrast. Where this starts to get interesting to me is what exactly are the altars and why aren't they dead? You could have a really technical conversation if you wanted to, like you have to shoot them in the brain or something like that, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm not sure I can justify this, but the thought that I have, just my knee-jerk reaction, is that the altars are linked to Punk Records. The robots don't actually have a brain inside of them. They can simply download themselves. So the way that I understand this, or the way that I choose to understand this, is Edison actually survived enough to be able to interact with Vegapunk records. Edison then downloaded a copy of the other alters into himself so that all of the brains are simultaneously in the same space. Essentially, you have a reformation of maybe Vegapunk as he is supposed to be, minus certain aspects, but with now a split personality, which is fascinating. So yeah, all of the alters are now downloaded into the same brain, but they still have a sense of their own identity. So when they rebuild Edison's body, they rebuild it with parts of all of them to represent what they now are. It's also hilarious that this is straight up docking from Thriller Bark. Remember, Frankie and the other Straw Hats docked, and Robin wanted no part of that? Decades passed, but Ichiro Oda remains the very same person. But yeah, my overall takeaway is that there is something important about punk records in the future. We already talked about how punk records, the brain, the clouds were cut and it now escapes. Like, this technology has a role to play in the future. And as we've said in numerous theories over the past year, I think that the punk records, a version of it, played a role in the past as well. If there's a point to the Alter's survival, I wonder if it has something to do with using punk records to essentially accomplish what Vegapunk accomplished in the Egghead Island arc and transmit some kind of message to the people from across the world, maybe once the One Piece is found. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm expecting something. And I also think we now have a way for Lilith to reconvene with the other Vegapunks. If Lilith doesn't join the Strat crew and travel to the ends of the ocean, which is, not a lot of people actually expect that. So if she leaves, right, we now know that Punk Records is literally a sky island. The Vegapunks call Herados of Weatheria, making this connection clear. Another long-standing theory of mine is that the Elbaf arc is going to allow us to revisit the Sky Islands. There's a giant tree in Elbaf, you climb the tree and it connects to the Sky Islands. So as Lilith heads to Elbaf, she's also heading towards Sky Islands and therefore potentially closer to the other Vegapunks at the conclusion of that arc. And just as a fun fact, Herados and the other wizards of Weatheria, they're actually from Burka, the same sky island as Arouge and Enel. But really where my mind wants to take this, to backtrack just a second, is the comparisons of Emu and the Vegapunks. We know that Punk Records seems to be very important in containing the Vegapunks and essentially making them immortal. Is there something similar to Punk Records going on with Emu? It's just a nagging thought. But I haven't really seen much conversation relating to this. I'm curious if people are mad that the alters are alive. Because that tends to happen, is like when a character dies but doesn't die, people get really mad. There's cases where I think that this detracts from the story, but this is not one. In my opinion, if you're going to resurrect a character that people think is dead, it needs to add something to the story. And it can't take away from a powerful moment that you had already created. I didn't cry when any of the other Vegapunk alters died. Sorry guys, I didn't. It never really impacted me, and I was pretty forthright about that as it occurred. My mentality was, well, one Vegapunk died, but another one survived, so Vegapunk didn't really die, so it's all kind of meaningless to me. It seems like what Oda was going for is putting the Stella Vegapunk on a tier higher than the other alters. That death was more important, and it's not more important because it's necessarily more emotional, although I think that it was. It's more important because it seems like the Stella was the truly living part, the human part of Vegapunk, aside from potentially the brain, which is weird. So basically, Vegapunk's death has a philosophical appeal, more so than an emotional one. But beyond that, the alters being alive is so interesting because of how they are immortal. The technology related to that, everything that we've talked about in this review, that has added something. Their survival has added something, so I enjoyed it. But you're free to have your own opinion and feel about it however it is that you want to. But honestly, this is kind of a straw man because I really haven't seen anybody complain about this. Not that I've been looking for takes. But yeah, guys, we end the chapter with the Revolutionary Army and Dragon. And of course, I enjoyed that too. I like how Dragon seems to be really aware of what's happening. He understands the purpose of what Vegapunk just did and the likely consequences of it. But speaking of closure, we had a conversation earlier in the arc between the shock of Vegapunk and Dragon, and that seems to be the point of this moment. We should be asking the question of what Shaka specifically said to Dragon, and I think that this sort of implies an answer. Shaka was conspiring with the Revolutionary Army. Dragon says we must hurry and achieve victory for our cause. I think Shaka told Dragon what was about to occur, probably with the intention of Dragon doing something else soon after. So the Revolutionary Army hype is real, and I'm here for it. But yeah, guys, I think that's everything that I had to say today. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed, just share your thoughts. Remember, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.